This should have been a simple vote to tell Theresa May to carry on trying to get changes to the Withdrawal Agreement demanded by hard Brexiteers in her party. And yet, they were the ones who defeated her, because this vote did not explicitly reverse an earlier vote by MPs against a no-deal Brexit. Jeremy Corbyn demanded that she stop running down the clock and come back to Parliament with a new coherent plan. Our political editor Gary Gibbon is with me now. What did tonight mean?
Remember, Theresa May's strategy was to get something else from the EU on the basis that she knew what she was doing here. She could get a majority out of that building for something. And they were already pretty sceptical about her abilities to do that, and this has not added to their confidence. And what the EU's been doing is holding back what few probably goodies that they have in store for Theresa May until the last minute, because they think there's no point giving them any further. They don't trust her management of the ship. I think this will encourage them to continue with that strategy, and any of them that are at the more daring end of concessions will have voices in their ears from colleagues saying, well, look, she's just not in control of this. She can't guarantee the votes, even on, as you said, a fairly straightforward measure like tonight.
But both main parties are divided. How united were they?
Really not very united. So Theresa May managed to actually lose because she was voted against by people who want us to come out of the European Union, but she really hacked off the people who would like to stay in the European Union in her party as well. That relatively small cohort of people on the Labour benches, you actually saw a rebellion as well. We think it's in the order of 41 Labour MPs who defied the whip and decided to back the SNP, who were saying in their motion that they want the date of Brexit delayed. Look down that list, that's an awful lot of Labour MPs who are bristling to push for a second referendum, and some of them, pretty small number, you get a very strong impression, bristling to actually break away and begin the process of starting another party. Here's how another extraordinary day went here.
God has got a special place in hell for every unbeliever.
Today was not a milestone moment, even if it did bring the campaigners out. Strains on party loyalty were on show, though, including Tory pro-Brexit MPs demanding the government commits to coming out of the EU with no deal if its own deal doesn't pass.
If we don't achieve a good deal, on the 29th of March, we won't just be leaving the EU, but we will be leaving on no-deal terms.
For the avoidance of doubt, Mr. Soubry, I'm very happy to confirm that, because that is what the legislation says.
The reason ERG MPs have spent the last 48 hours pondering whether to back this or not is because you're not entirely sure you can trust the government, are you?
I think the government needs to write things down rather than just say things. And ultimately, if they did that, I think we could be a lot more easy about how we were supporting them.
Deep unease as well amongst Tories who wanted no deal ruled out.
I would like to hear from the Right Honourable Gentleman that he gives equal respect to the opinion expressed by that House, for if he fails to do that, it is contemptuous of this House.
Well, firstly, I absolutely respect votes of this House.
It calls into question whether, in fact, the government, which I do my best to support despite the problems we've got, is in fact acting in the national interest at all. And I simply say to them that there is going to come a time when my ability to support this government is going to run out completely if we continue behaving in this absolutely crazy fashion.
His loyalty was at breaking point, but the government hadn't managed to calm the other side in its own party either. And the ERG pro-Brexit group helped to deliver a defeat for the government.
The ayes to the right, 258. The noes to the left, 303.
It is surprising that the Prime Minister is not even here to hear the result of this vote. So, Mr. Speaker, I was going to ask her to come to the dispatch box now and admit that her strategy has failed.
The Prime Minister was still on the premises but didn't fancy adding to the excitement. The defeat wasn't lethal, but it will encourage Brussels to hold back on any concessions. So, the sequence of meetings with little paperwork and little substance, the smoke and mirrors being talked of in Brussels, looks like continuing for some time yet. EU officials say the government hasn't got a hard proposal for them to work on, and any legal guarantees on offer might as well be held back, as they wouldn't deliver a victory for the deal if they were put on the table right now.
I think you've got to play for time, you've got to run down the clock, all the pejorative terms being used.
And all that stuff that's happening in Brussels and other cities, people meeting.
It's all play acting.
Yesterday, Donald Tusk said, and I quote, still waiting for concrete, realistic proposals from London on how to break the Brexit impasse.
Well, one should always be slightly cautious about what is said on Twitter generally. And
it's just going through the motions. I mean, she's running down the clock.
In Labour, too, real tensions, and for some, party loyalties close to breaking point.
The underlying reasons we are in this mess, why are we at this Groundhog Day right now? The truth is that our party political system is shattered and it is broken, and it is letting this country down at a crucial time.
The political crisis here, an opportunity for others. The Dutch government has launched an ad with Brexit the Muppet. The foreign minister posing with him on his desk. The message to British businesses: come to Holland to escape the furry beast.
Well, earlier I spoke to the Justice Minister, Rory Stewart, and I began by asking him what he thinks Europe will make of tonight's defeat.
Well, I'm afraid it's another complicated moment. I mean, you've just got to put it in context of weeks and months of this. It's no secret that we are struggling to get a majority together in Parliament for a deal. And we're in a situation where we have to get two things. We've got to get a majority in Parliament, and we've got to get 27 member states across the line. And this isn't proving easy.
Has this weakened her hand, as ministers warned it would?
Well, it means that when we go back to Brussels, and that's why I'm disappointed by the results, Brussels may attempt to say, well, why should we make a concession? We don't know what we'll get in Parliament.
So what is the will of Parliament on no deal as far as you're concerned?
Well, the vote under the Spellman Amendment, and it was just a suggested amendment, was to rule out no deal. And I think Parliament is against no deal. And it's not just Parliament's against no deal. I mean, as a government minister, I'm very, very aware of the serious risks around no deal. We don't want to exaggerate this out of all proportion, but there's absolutely no doubt it will be more difficult getting goods across the Channel.
Will you be one of those ministers who, having just warned about the perils of no deal, has to resign from the government in order to ensure that no deal doesn't happen?
No, I've made it clear that I'm not resigning over this issue, but I do think...
So you would let no deal happen?
I don't think no deal would happen, and I'm very reassured that that is not the direction the Prime Minister's going.
But you have to do something to make that happen, don't you? You can't just say you don't think it's going to happen. You, as an individual MP, have to vote one way or another.
You're absolutely right on that. But let me explain why I'm saying this. I'm saying this because the Prime Minister is currently negotiating in Brussels. She's trying to get a concession on the backstop, and we're trying to get people through the House of Commons to vote. So my taking a position weeks in advance on what I do in that situation isn't helping the Prime Minister on this negotiation.
I mean, Oliver Letwin has today said, when push comes to shove, it is now clear to him that the Prime Minister is prepared to go for no deal. Is he right?
I'm certain that the Prime Minister, who sees far more briefings than I do, and is deeply, deeply aware, as we all are, as ministers and people in the government, of the problems. But as she keeps saying, the way to avoid no deal is to get people to coalesce around the withdrawal agreement. If I can make an appeal for a second, we've got to get some Labour votes here, because Jeremy Corbyn's position on the customs union is not a million miles away from where the Prime Minister's withdrawal agreement is. Even if you wanted to get to the customs union, you would have to vote for the withdrawal agreement.
Ollie Robbins was absolutely right when he was overheard in that bar saying it's going to be a choice of delay or the deal as it stands, and the deal as it stands is not looking anywhere near viable. So we're looking at delay. I mean, haven't you got at some point in time to be honest with people and say, yes, delay is a possibility now?
I think you, everybody understand how tense this is getting, how close to the line this is getting, how difficult this is going to be. But we've got to keep the focus on getting those votes in Parliament and remembering that, yes, there is a problem with the ERG and the hard Brexiteers. There's also an opportunity now for Labour to vote for a withdrawal agreement, because even if they wanted ultimately a customs union, they would have to go through this withdrawal agreement.
Well, the other thing that might be in the national interest would be to let Labour try and put together a majority on Brexit. Why don't you let Labour present their vision and see if they can get it through?
Well, politely, whatever Labour is proposing would have to go through the withdrawal agreement. So they should vote for the withdrawal agreement with us, because it doesn't matter whether you wanted Norway or Canada or any kind of future relationship. We have to have that transition period. We have to have that 2-year transition period. And that involves a withdrawal agreement. What Labour is debating is the political agreement, which is a non-legally binding text, which could be debated in Parliament in the future. There's no reason to drive us over a cliff edge over this issue of the withdrawal agreement.
Well, joining me now from the lobby of the House of Commons is the Shadow Chancellor, John McDonald. John McDonald, the SNP leader Nicola Sturgeon says your party's still looking like the midwives of a Tory Brexit. She's right, isn't she?
No, quite the reverse. And what we're seeing now is a Prime Minister that's floundering, and basically Parliament taking the whole Brexit issue out of her hands. And now we're into that process whereby in Parliament we'll have I think a proper negotiation about a way forward. We've put forward Labour's proposals. I think they could command a majority in due course, and there needs to be discussion about that rapidly. But we've also said to the government, you are delaying, you're running the clock down, and we're trying to set a timetable so that by the end of this month we get a deal, or failing that we support Yvette Cooper's proposals, which means Parliament then will have to vote on extending Article 50.
So it will be Labour policy to have a delay. The trouble is, you couldn't get your MPs to vote for it last time, and you haven't punished them, have you? So what makes you think you'll get them to vote for it this time?
We've said we'll support Yvette Cooper's proposal. It's a slightly different proposal from last time, but as we've seen, the government now is losing control of the whole process. So Parliament itself, I think, will assert control.
But you haven't got control of your MPs either.
If it needs more time, I'm sure Parliament will come to a reasonable decision on that. And when it comes down to control of MPs, I think this is Parliament doing its job. MPs taking account of their constituency interests and also their country's interests, and look at the long-term interests rather than just party political advantage.
So you do now want a delay?
What we're saying is we think the government should come back by the end of the month with its proposals, with a meaningful vote. And at that stage, if the government can't provide us with a way through all this,
and there's no prospect of that, is there?
And can't agree our proposals, well, that's when Parliament will have to make that decision. That's why we're supporting Yvette Cooper's proposals. But we believe I think there could be an agreement around what we're proposing, and that's why, as I say, Parliament now, I think, is taking this out of the hands of the Prime Minister, and you're seeing Parliament now leading the way.
So you've ditched your agreed conference policy position of switching to calling for a public vote, haven't you? The second referendum's off.
No, not at all. We've kept that on the table, because what we've said is if Parliament can't arrive at an agreement on a way forward, a deal on a way forward, of course we have to remain on the table with the option of going back to the people. And going back to the people either in the general election or with another referendum. We've made that clear, and that will, over the next few weeks, we'll see whether or not the Prime Minister can come back with a deal that will get through Parliament, or whether we can agree in Parliament itself on a way forward, a new deal. If not, yes, back to the people.
So Labour will lay down a motion for a second referendum if there is no agreement in a Parliament over a deal?
What we've said is we await what the Prime Minister will bring back. We're saying that needs to be done by the end of the month. We'll consider that then. We'll put our own proposals up as well, and so we'll concede whether Parliament itself can agree a way forward. If it can't, well, there's no other option, as we've said in our conference resolution, we have to go back to the people.
That before the end of March, Labour will have switched to backing a second referendum, as was supposed to be the sequence in your policy?
We've adhered to the policy sequence.
Well, you haven't. You've gone back to Plan A.
No, we haven't.
Your sequence was try and get a deal that you wanted, then try and get a general election, then a people's vote is on the table.
And that's
You've now gone back to try to negotiate a deal.
You're not listening. That's exactly what we're trying to do, seeing whether or not we can get a deal which will protect jobs in the economy. The Prime Minister doesn't seem to be capable of that. We'll see if we can get that through Parliament, a deal that can reach a consensus if possible. If we can't get that, we remain of the view then a general election, or failing that, we keep the option of going back to the people in a people's vote. Of course we do.
The trouble is your party is deeply divided, looking at a split, not least over the ongoing issues of anti-Semitism. Even you, this weekend, have set this fire going again by being president of a Labour group in which you've adopted a motion against Labour's policy on anti-Semitism, and on which a woman who is facing anti-Semitism allegations and is currently suspended is an office holder.
Well, the LRC comes to its own decisions. Yes, I'm the president of it. I'm not involved in the day-to-day decisions.
You're the president.
And yes, that's right. And I've made my position very, very clear about adopting the definition. I led on that last year, and about the way in which we should handle these matters seriously and swiftly. And that's exactly what we're doing as a party.
Should these people quit the party if they're unable to settle in?
No, of course not. I think there's
you
a broad
threatened
church.
Luciana Berger last week, didn't you? Saying she should make clear she's not going to be part of any breakaway party in order to get her local party off her back.
Well, I think the whole process we're going through at the moment demonstrates that we are a broad church. We can contain a wide range of views, and I see no reason why anyone would want to splinter off in any way, because we're adhering to conference policy unanimously agreed at our party conference.
Before you go, let's have a quick game of villain or hero. Margaret Thatcher, villain or hero?
Well, as I saw last night, you can't sum up history in one word.
Are you saying you regret your answer yesterday?
No, not at all. I put them in context as well.
So you still think Churchill was a villain?
If you look at the way in which you judge a person in history, you judge, yes, and sometimes someone can be a hero and at other times can perform acts which you cannot support and are sometimes disgraceful. And that, I think, is what my statements have done is ensured that there is a wider debate about how you judge a person in history.
John McDonald, thank you very much for joining us. Well, let's hear now from a Conservative MP now who has just called this result a body blow to Theresa May, describing a profound lack of leadership at the top of government. Anna Soubry joins me now from that same lobby in the House of Commons. Anna Soubry, what is your message to Conservative colleagues like Rory Stewart, who I spoke to earlier, who said he's unable to say he will resign in order to stop no deal?
Well, I think people do have to put their country first and foremost, and somebody like Rory actually has served his country superbly in the past when he was in our armed forces. So he knows all about courage and service, and I think he and many others have really got now to put the country first and show that courage and say that we will not allow this great country of ours to crash out of the European Union without a deal in place. And I'm sorry to say that it was a spine-chillingly dreadful moment when, in effect, the Secretary of State for exiting the European Union made it quite clear that this Prime Minister and this government is prepared to do exactly that. And to make it even worse, it's actually a Conservative Prime Minister and a Conservative government.
But how sure are you that on February the 27th, when this comes back, there will be enough Conservatives who are now prepared to back this Cooper Amendment to delay Brexit on March the 29th to outnumber the Labour rebels?
I'm afraid I don't know. I do not know what the numbers are. I don't know the level of courage, and it takes a lot of courage to do these things, though we've seen it in Sam Gyimah, Joe Johnson, Gito Begg, and of course in Philip Lee, all of whom put their country first and said, look, I'm sorry, I just can't be part of this government, and I'm going to put myself out of office, and I'm going to go through the lobbies and vote in the national interest, and others need to follow them. So I don't know what's going to happen, but I do know that we can't go on like this. We have a pitiful level of leadership in both parties. You've just heard from John McDonald about the complete sellout that is taking place now amongst the Labour leadership, failing to deliver on their very clear conference policy, which was that after exploring all these other things, they would then go to a people's vote. And the truth is, people like John McDonald, they want Brexit. That is the absolute essence of their politics and has been for decades. They are very happy for us to lead, and if we leave with the worst possible deal, they have no problem with that because they'll hashtag it Tory Brexit.
Right, but once upon a time, you were prepared to contemplate a much softer Brexit, a Norway-style Brexit, in which Britain
Absolutely.
stayed in the single market and the customs union. That's
Absolutely.
what Labour is working towards effectively
No, it
now.
isn't.
If they put that back on the table, would you consider compromising in order to deliver the result of the referendum?
Can I just be absolutely clear about this? First of all, it runs through my DNA that I'm a pragmatic person and I compromise. Let's get this clear. Labour is not putting forward a policy of the customs union and the single market. They've absolutely refused to back the single market. So when brave people like Chuka Umunna put those amendments forward in Parliament, people like me supported it. As you rightly say, I've always wanted the single market and the customs union to do the right thing by British business and, of course, to avoid the hard border in Northern Ireland. It took lots of very brave Labour colleagues who then get all the death threats and the threats of deselection to do that in the face of it being absolutely voted against by that Labour front bench. And the reason, of course, that Labour take the view on the single market is because they are being cowards about the benefits of free movement. That is the reality of the Labour Party. Whichever way you cut it, they are being cowardly on their front bench about doing the right thing by this country and, most importantly, having that people's vote, which is the only way now to get out of this dreadful, excruciating
Isn't that dead? I mean,
mess.
no one's talking about a people's vote anymore, are they?
Who isn't?
Well,
I'm not being
the
rude, but there
campaign's
seems
gone
to be an
pretty
awful
quiet.
lot of noise behind you at the moment, Chris, and I think those people are all asking for a people's vote.